So imagine my disappointment when this author popped up in my judging group. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And this week I am talking about my reviews and ratings for the Booktube Prize translated works Octofinal. That's a mouthful. I think I've included all the relevant information in that. I was in group, I want to say G. I was underwhelmed when I got my allocation for my group to judge. So before the final books are picked for the YouTube prize, the Booktube Prize, to go through all the judging rounds, there's a bigger pool of books that judges get to vote. So in each category, I think there's 40 books, you get to vote for 20 of those to make it through to the actual Octofinals, quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then finals. And so in the group that I was allocated, there was one book that I had already read and I had voted for, and then I had not voted for any of the others, so I was a bit dubious. I didn't have as bad a time as Heather over at Soggy Expat Book Nerd had with her Octofinals group, but it wasn't the best reading experience of my life, I won't lie. But the official announcement has been made of what books made it through from the Octofinals to the quarterfinals. So as I talk about the books that I read, I will talk about whether they made it through to the quarterfinals as well, and just see how my feelings about books measured up against the other judges in my group, to see whether we agreed or not. I might get interrupted as I'm recording this because I am waiting for my Tyler to turn up. He told me he was going to be here early today. It is now past 10 o'clock and there is no sign of him. I do think I'm having the piss taken out of me. I don't like situations like this. I don't like confrontation, so I don't want to have it out with him. And probably we can guarantee that he will turn up as soon as I get into a flow in this video. So apologies for any lack of continuity. No, that was just my dog wanting out. There is still no sign of the Tyler. And in all, I don't even judge my dog for that because he hasn't been walked yet because I'm waiting on this bloody Tyler. But anyway, let's get on to the books. So I'm going to talk about these, ranking them 6th to 1st as I saw them. And then I'll talk about, well, as I go through, I'll talk about whether my fellow judges agreed with me. So the first book I read was Clarice Lispector's The Apprenticeship or the Book of Pleasures. This is my lowest rated book in the group. This is number 6. And my fellow judges agreed with me because it hasn't made it through to the quarterfinals. Lispector had been on my radar, very vaguely, as someone that I should try. I can't remember why actually. But so I was intrigued when this book came up in my judging group. Although obviously a bit pensive too, because I understood her to be quite an existential, experimental sort of writer, which isn't usually the kind of writing that I gel with. And unfortunately this book held up my suspicions that I just don't get on, particularly existentialism, really philosophical thoughts. This book is about a woman who is essentially being coached into a relationship by a man. Willingly coached, so I suppose we can't say groomed, but the dynamic was hugely problematic for me. You know, on the surface, it could be seen as a man who is patiently waiting for a woman to be comfortable and sure of herself and ready enough to embark on a relationship, which actually is really great, really healthy. It doesn't play out that way, at least my reading of it, it didn't play out that way. And for me, I think the title gives it away. As the apprentice, the woman, I think Lola or Lolly or something, she has very little power in this setup. Subject matter aside, I couldn't even appreciate the writing either. You know, I won't lie, there are some beautiful insights, some really nice passages and turns of phrase in this book, but to get to them I had to wade through entire sections that I just didn't understand, or which bored me to tears. Reading this was like doing homework. I'm not a very philosophical person, I suppose, and the insistence of the characters to over analyze every tiny thing. It was just too much like hard work for me. This was not a book of pleasures for me as a reader. To the point where if I had not been reading it under obligation to the Booktube Prize, I'd have DNF'd it, like mere pages in. And that's a big statement for me because I hardly ever DNF books. Moving on to my 5th rated book was The Passenger by Ulrich Alexander Boschwitz. So yeah, this came in 5th in my rankings, and again, the other judges agreed with me. It didn't move forward to the quarterfinals. This book really intrigued me. It's about a Jewish man who is trying to flee the Nazis in Germany in 1938, as the stormtroopers have kind of started rounding up Jewish people. It was written very close after the time, and by that I mean like months close, like not years close. And it's almost surreal, and that makes it really painful to read because obviously history's shown us that this was awfully real. So with little to his name after his Aryan business partners, friends, and even family shun him or take advantage of the situation to financially drain him, protagonist Otto Silbermann, I think he's called, he finds himself ricocheting across Germany from like one train to another as he finds all of his exits blocked. He's protected to some extent by his more Aryan than Jewish appearance, but he, nonetheless experiences the paranoia of a hunted man who can't trust anyone around him. They could find him out at any time. And this book, it gives a perspective on the Nazi persecution of Jews that I don't really think I've ever read before. So from that side of things, I found this book really interesting. However, I just won't ever be excited about a story about a middle-aged, middle-class man who is more concerned with his money than his safety, and that is very much Otto, at least to begin with. I think I can see the point that the author was making with regard to that. Maybe that's just my own take on it. But having to spend so much time in Otto's thoughts to get to that point was a bit of a slog. Although, once the panic and desperation sets in, this book does become much more human, a much more compelling read. Helped with that is the writing. I cannot believe how young the author was when he wrote this book. He was only 23 years old, and he so accurately gets inside the head of a man like Otto, and particularly the final scenes. The author really grasps the sense of that mania that kicks in when someone realizes that they are completely trapped. It's really sad reading this book knowing that the author died so young. He died only 4 years after writing this. I think he was on a boat that was torpedoed by the Germans, because it makes me think, what could his future have held if not for all these evils of bigotry and power struggles that we're surrounded with? Because I couldn't fault the writing of this book. I just wasn't crazy about the character and the way that some of the story played out. My 4th book was The Republic of False Truths by Alaa al-Aswany. And yeah, my fellow judges agreed this hasn't made it through to the quarterfinals. So I was going to read another book by this author last year, The Yakubian Building, but then I had to switch it out for something different, and I felt a bit guilty about that until I saw I think it was Scott what is wrong with me today? Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and the Plot. He had read The Yakubian Building, and he just said it was really misogynistic. So I was glad to have swerved it. So imagine my disappointment when this author popped up in my judging group. So this book tells the events of the Arab Spring and the subsequent revolution that happened in Egypt in 2011, and it's as seen through the eyes of a cast of different characters. So we've got like the corrupt politician, his daughter that breaks ranks to follow a man she loves into the protests. There's the rabid cleric. We've got an idealistic trade unionist, a passionate young teacher, and this kind of middle-aged washed-up actor who gets drawn into the movement as some sort of midlife crisis-fueled desire to do something. And through all their different experiences, the events are reported, and we get an insight into the country and its people at that time, and the motivations of those who were fighting for democracy or not. And it's that plot that saved this book for me. I'm always going to be interested in learning about other cultures, other people, and I really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about the revolution and the goings on in Egypt at that different time through these different groups of people. And okay, the writing helped that along too. It was accessible, and I did appreciate some of the kind of scathing comments that were made, but I could definitely see the misogyny that Scott had talked about. In general, women in this book are simply props for the men, and the way they're written about, in particular through the eyes of midlife crisis guy, are pretty repugnant. It wasn't full out misogyny 100% of the time, and there were some female characters that did have a bit of an interesting storyline and things like that, but you can definitely tell what the author's kind of views on women are. And in general, like male as well as female, I felt like the characters in this were pretty flat, pretty one-dimensional. And given like this was a passionate uprising with high stakes for the people that were involved, and I just didn't care what happened to any of them. Like I said before, I rarely DNF books. I'm hopeless at DNF books. So, I will stagger on with books much longer than I should have done. So if I hadn't been obliged to read this for the prize and for some strange unknown reason had still picked it up, I probably would still have finished it, but I was pretty unimpressed with this book. And actually now, having talked about both of these, this for me was a better book, so I would actually switch my rankings around, and this would have been 5th and this would have been 4th. It doesn't really matter now. Obviously the results have been drawn, and I don't think it would have influenced it because neither of them made it through to the quarterfinals. Which does mean that my top 3 books all made it through to the quarterfinals, which is good. I don't think that's happened before, so hopefully that is the way things are set to continue in the Booktube Prize for me this year. So my 4th book was 3 o'clock in the morning by Gianrico Carofiglio, and this is set in the 80s, and it focuses on a 48-hour period in which an Italian father and his son have to stay awake in the French city of Marseille. So as part of investigations into his epilepsy, 18-year-old Antonio is asked by his consultant not to sleep for 48 hours. And his father, who has gone with him to France for this trip, this appointment, decides to do the same, whether that's as a mark of solidarity or just to make sure his son doesn't fall asleep. I don't know. But their relationship isn't a close one, and those hours stretch ahead a little unnervingly, both for them and for the reader. We follow them as they try to fill their time and not fall asleep by wandering through the city. They go on an excursion, they go to coffee shops and bars and a jazz club, and they even end up at a party. And all the while we see their relationship and their understanding of one another grow, not just as father and son, but as people. I hadn't expected to enjoy this book as much as I did. I found the earlier on in the book depictions of the epileptic experience quite interesting, so that drew me in, but it was the relationship development that really kept me turning the pages. In my opinion, the illness aspect is just a tool to get the characters to where they need to be. This is not a book about living with epilepsy or living with a chronic illness or anything like that. It's also not a particularly dramatic book. Not a whole lot happens. For me, this is more of a character study than it is plot driven. However, when there are more plotty parts, I actually bloody hated them. One in particular I just felt was gratuitous. They were quite off-putting, and both the ones that I can think of focused on sex, and I find that male coming-of-age stories rarely seem complete without some seedy element, and I find that quite depressing and not particularly interesting to read. This book was never going to be a 5-star for me anyway, because it just lacks that certain je ne sais quoi. Je ne sais quoi. Juge. But those parts in particular made me consider dropping like another star off my rating for this one, which was a shame because overall fairly decent. I think that's the elusive plasterer. We'll see. No, it was just my neighbours. Anyway, back to books. So my second place ranking was Kikuko Tsumura's There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job. I read this last year and it has remained pretty fresh in my mind, and I also have my notes to refer to, so I didn't reread it for this. But having read the other books, this is definitely a solid second place book for me, or second rated book for me. And obviously it's moved through to the quarterfinals, so I wasn't the only one who thought that way. So I remember picking this book up because the premise really spoke to me, and it still speaks to me now. So there's a woman in her 30s who has burnt out from her career. It's set in Japan, and she has like a recruitment officer, and she tasks this recruitment officer to find her a job with minimal expectations, like no responsibilities or anything, like literally almost no work. And I'm suffering from burnout at the moment. I was feeling pretty burnt out when I read this last year. Definitely resonated with me. But beyond that, I don't think I knew what to expect from this book, and what I found was much better than I could have anticipated. So this book is split into sections which focus on each of the jobs that the narrator takes, and the jobs themselves are like super weird. She has one where she's like recording jingles to play on local buses. She writes the trivia questions for cracker rappers. She has a job viewing surveillance tapes, one punching the serration holes in tickets in like this isolated cabin in the middle of a wood. And so all the jobs have like elements that verge on the surreal, whether it's the job itself or her co-workers. And we just follow her. She turns up to these jobs every day, but in the process, some really interesting points about work had come up. And not the cynical ones that I had thought, about the way that modern work is structured and that it's killing us all very, very slowly. This book more makes the point that it doesn't matter how absurd the task that you're doing, it doesn't matter how weird your co-workers are, or how pointless you feel like your job is. We should all try and draw meaning and purpose from what we do, because even like the most mind-numbing jobs will have some element where you're either helping others, or you're just connecting with other people, you're offering a service, or you're just simply having something to do with your days. And if you can find that and see work as offering us more than just our pay, life can be a bit more get throughable. I don't know. I remember really liking the writing style of this book. It's quite spare prose, which in Japanese books I never know if that is the language or the translation, but either way I found like the voice of the narrator sounded really authentic, because it also had a tone that I recognize from other Japanese books that I've read. And apart from the insights that are in this book around work, it's actually quite funny as well, which was just a really good combination for me. And I just thought there was a sweetness about the whole book that I really liked. Sorry, my heating's kicked in now and I can't be bothered opening that cupboard to turn the boiler off. On to my first plate, what is wrong with me today? My first ranked book was My Heart by Semezdin Mehmedinović. So this obviously has also made it through to the quarterfinals as well. And this is autofiction about a Yugoslavian writer who now lives in the United States, who is reflecting on the things that are most important to him following a heart attack at the age of 50. So it's split into 3 parts. One's about his actual heart attack. One is like a travel diary of a road trip he took with his son. And one is about his wife after she has a stroke. And I felt like this book was full of warmth and love and lots of insight on mortality, memory, living, things like that. For me, the section on his wife's stroke and her like subsequent rehabilitation was probably the most powerful out of the 3 sections, because there's lots of interesting like musings on the power of memory and how what we know shapes who we are. But that's not to say that the other 2 sections were any less interesting. I feel like they were picked really well in order to show the writer from different angles, so we get like a full idea of him. And woven through it all is the experience of being an immigrant from Sarajevo to the United States in the 90s. And I always really enjoy reading about the immigrant experience, no matter where the person's come from and where they've gone to. There's something about that will always interest me. Because this isn't a straight memoir, it's hard to know which parts are fictionalized, and you know, I don't really think that matters, but just because I'm super nosy, I really wish I knew the extent of the fictionalization. As a reader, like, it felt like a very authentic memoir, and I can definitely see why the blurb hails the author as, I think, like one of the greatest writers from the former Yugoslavia, because I really did enjoy reading this book. So those are my rankings. This round was better than I'd feared. None of the books really blew me away though. I missed out on the Octofinals round last year because I couldn't get hold of one of the books. So I don't know whether my experience is typical in the Octofinals stage. Like, I just kept telling myself, like, we're sorting the wheat from the chaff, essentially. Because obviously the winners are in there somewhere, but it's just the luck of the draw whether you get a group that has any of those winners in it. I think it's pretty safe to say that I didn't have any of the winners in this round, but you know, the Booktube Prize can have some surprises in store, so who knows. So we've moved on to the quarterfinals, and for this round I will be reading non-fiction, and I've been given group C. So what will I be reading? First up, we have Chasing Me to My Grave, an artist's memoir of the Jim Crow South by Winfred Rembert. And I'm actually struggling to get a copy of this. None of my libraries have it. It's not available on Kindle, and it's £20 to buy new, which no. I have found someone who's also read it for the prize for the Octofinals, who has sent me a copy, but it's an EPUB file, so I need to work out how to open that on my Kindle. This is definitely the downside to being part of the prize when you aren't in America. But anyway, right. I didn't vote for this book to make it into the judging pool, but I do think it was one of those ones that I was swithering, like sitting on the fence about. I'm really interested in the race history and the current state of affairs in America, because not only is it deeply tragic, but it also influenced and continues to influence the rest of the world. I gather Rembert is an artist and that this is illustrated, so if I can get it to work, this should be a really interesting read. Next up is Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. And I did vote for this one to be in the judging pool, and I'm just waiting for my copy. I've got both a physical and an ebook library hold, so I'm just waiting for one of those to come through. This is about the Sackler family who gained their disgusting levels of wealth by being behind the OxyContin epidemic in the US. Because, hey, who cares about junkies when you've got yachts and diamond-encrusted toilet seats to buy? But seriously, like, this is a topic that's interested me a lot. The devastation of the addiction crisis is just awful. And so I'm really hoping this is going to be a brutal attack on those who get rich off of other people's misery. Third up, we have A Little Devil in America, Notes and Praise of Black Performance by Hanif Abdurraqib. I was terrible at languages at school, and this plays out repeatedly in my attempts to pronounce people's names on Booktube. I'm very sorry. This is another one I didn't vote for in the judging pool selection, but I am glad that it's made it this far because it does sound really interesting. It's about how Black performance is woven into the cultural fabric of America, and I think the reason I didn't vote for it is because that just, you know, in general, I don't have a massive interest in the music or the films or the performances from like early 20th century or before that, whether that's white, black, American, British or anywhere else. And I get the vibe that this is what this book might mainly focus on. But hey, we read to expand our knowledge. I definitely do. So I've got this ready to go on my Kindle and I'm actually really looking forward to it. Book number 4 is The Doctor's Blackwell, How Two Pioneering Sisters Brought Medicine to Women and Women to Medicine. I hope I've got that right. By Janice P. Nimura. This is another book that I didn't vote for, but again, not because, you know, I really didn't want to read it. I think there were just others that I was more interested in and that I wanted to see get into the judging pool more than this one. I think the main reason I didn't vote for this one is that there's actually quite a few other books on this subject. So to me, it didn't look like it would be offering anything particularly fresh. But here we are. It's through to the quarterfinals and it's waiting on my Kindle for me. This is about the Blackwell sisters, who were the first women to become MDs, which I think it stands for medical doctor. It's not really a term we use here, but I assume that's what it means as a way to kind of like differentiate from people with doctorates in other subjects. So yeah, they were the first women to become MDs in America in like the 1840s, 1850s. So hopefully this is going to serve up a nice slice of girl power. Then we have All In, the autobiography by Billie Jean King, which, it's a sports memoir. Which is like right up there with political biographies as something that I do not want. But actually, like, for transparency, I don't think this one was culled from like the voting pool for me as quickly as some other books were. And I think that's because I'm hoping this isn't just a sports memoir, because apparently she was she was a big deal in tennis. Hits ball, earns more than scientists who are working to develop life-saving vaccines. But she was, or is, she's still alive, I think, quite the activist for like gay rights, feminism, all the good stuff. So I'm really, really hoping that when I get it out the library, it's much more about that than it is about sportsing. Please. Finally, we have Diary of a Naturalist by Dara McAnulty, and I voted for this one. I think I'm going to listen to it as an audiobook if I ever get through the one that I'm on, which is 30 hours long. So it's naturalist, not naturist. Very different things. And a 15-year-old naturist would not be someone I think I would feel entirely comfortable reading about. But no, this is Dara's memoir of being like totally into nature. Nature is his escape and support as he navigates life with autism, and these are his actual diary entries, I believe. I like nature writing. I'm interested in what it's like living with autism. And this is like own voices. I mean, it's his diary. Sounds perfect. I'm really looking forward to this one. My only caveat is that he's 15. I hope he's a mature, eloquent 15-year-old, because no one would have published my diary when I was 15, I tell you that. So this is looking like a good round. And except for Empire of Pain and the sports memoir, none of them are over 400 pages either, which is always a nice bonus when it comes to non-fiction, because this category can have some absolute chonkers in it. This round runs through April and I think to the end of May, so I will share with you all what my thoughts and my rankings were in a video then once the results for this round have been announced, and I'll probably go on to judge the semi-finals as well. So again, I'll probably tag on what I get allocated for that at the end of my rankings video too. So that was quite a lot of books. Are you taking part in the quarterfinals of the Booktube Prize? What group have you been given? What are you thinking about it? If you've made a video, let me know as well, and I will go and check it out. Did you take part in the Octofinals? Was your round as, you know, meh as mine was, or as absolutely terrible as Heather's was? And just in general, talk books to me. Talk books. And I will see you next time. Bye. And rankings for the book turn of my ratings and ranking. Dude, I'm struggling as it is. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah. Oh, Hamish, no. You sit. You stay.